Students, welcome again to the course of Introduction to Economics. I'm your course instructor Shehzad Khan Durrani, lecturer, Institute of Business Studies, Kohat University of Science and Technology, Hango campus. This is our lecture number 11 and our topic for today's lecture is market equilibrium. So let's start. Our outline, it includes market equilibrium, which is our main topic, and our subtopics are consumer surplus, right? And then producer surplus, and then the concept of the demand exceed or shortage, and at the end, the concept of supply exceed, or we can also call it surplus. So let's start. We will start from the basic concept of the market equilibrium, right? So market equilibrium. The basic idea of the market equilibrium is that demand and supply interact to ensure an equilibrium, right? An equilibrium point, price and quantity, between the price and the quantity demanded, or you can also call it a market equilibrium, right? So the market equilibrium is actually an intersecting point, right? The point where demand and supply interact, where there is no increase in the price and no increase in the quantity demanded, right? They remain stable, right, at that point. So that point is actually called the market equilibrium. That's the basic idea behind the market equilibrium. So the market equilibrium occurs at that price and quantity demanded, where the forces of supply and demanded are in balance, right? So the forces of both supply and demanded are in balance, right? There is no change or there is no increase or decrease in the supply and the demand. At the equilibrium price or at the equilibrium point, the amount that buyers want to buy is just equal to the amount that sellers want to sell, right? So both the buyers and the sellers, for example, right? It's a common point between them, right? It's equal for both of them. That's why it's called the equilibrium point. So the reasons why we call this an equilibrium is that when supply and demand are in balance, right? They are equal, they are in balance condition, right? There is no reason for price to rise or fall, right? So sometimes you can see an equilibrium in the economy, right? You cannot see any rise in the price or fall in the price. Or any, for example, rise in demand or fall in the demand if other things remains unchanged. Other things remains means the other external forces that they are actually in economics. You have to remember that there are always certain external forces, for example, that they can change, for example, the variables, right? The main variables actually, like the supply and the demand, right? And these forces are the technological changes, the political changes, or maybe, for example, goals of the firm, or maybe the number of consumers that they are switching, or maybe the income. Other many reasons are available. So market equilibrium, look at this table. Now we will try to understand the concept of the market equilibrium through this point, right? Here we have the price per unit, which is given in rupees. Let's say it's 10, right? So the quantity demanded in kgs is 5 kg they are demanding, and there is a supply available. The supplier is offering the market to the market, that is 25 kg. The demand is 5 and the price per unit is 10, right? So look at this. The situation here, there is a surplus, right? Because, for example, the quantity demanded is low, right? And the quantity supply is high, right? So we can say that there is a surplus situation, right? It means that the products or the supply is available in the market, right? There is a pressure on the price, and the pressure is what? Because the quantity is available in the market, so the price will reduce just because of the pressure on the price. So that's why the price will reduce. Now look at here. Here, for example, the price reduced to 8, right? The second one. Now the quantity demanded will increase, as we saw in the relationship between the, or in the law of demand. There is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. So there is an increase in the quantity demanded. It means, for example, that there is less supply available as before, right? Because of the quantity demand exceeds, clear. But still the situation is in surplus. Still there is a pressure on the price, and there can be a decrease in the price, right? There is an opportunity available here. For example, if we reduce the price to 6, for example, right, and the quantity demand will exceed as the price, for example, decrease, so the quantity demand will increase, clear. So it reaches to 15, right, and the quantity supply is also 15, right? The total was 25, 5, 20, 10, 30, right? So 15, 15. So this is an equilibrium position because the quantity supply is the same as the quantity demanded, right, with the price, with that fixed price. And then this is called the equilibrium position, and this is called a neutral. There is no pressure on the price. Let's see if we reduce the price to 4, right? So if you reduce the price to 4, the quantity demand will increase. Why the quantity demand? Because you reduces the price, so the people will demand more, right? But because there is no profit for the producers, so they are not interested. So there is no supply, or there is like 10 supply still available in the market. So it means there is a shortage. There is what? There is a shortage in the market because the quantity demand here exceeds than the supply. Here it exceeds than the supply, so there will be a shortage, right? And there are chances that the price will go up because there is what? There is a shortage, right? The next one, if you reduce the price to 2, right, so the quantity demand is 5 and there is more shortage of supply. So again there is a what? There is a shortage again, for example, here in the market. So there are chances, plenty of chances in the increase of the price because there is a pressure on the price and the prices will go upward. So this is the only point which we call it the market equilibrium, right? Why? Because both the quantity demanded and the supply to the market is the same, right? And this is the situation is called the equilibrium situation, right? And there is no pressure on the price and it's called neutral. So we call it the market equilibrium. I hope it's very much clear now. Now we will move to the next slide. So look at this table as we discussed, right? And we try to find out the point of equilibrium, right? That we call it the market equilibrium. So the quantity demanded was 15, so the quantity supplied to the market was 15 as well when the price is 6, right? Now we will represent it graphically, right, this concept. So look at here in the graph. In the graph, as we can see here, for example, this is the graph of the supply which is moving upward, and the demand curve is sloping downward. This is sloping upward, clear? Now, for example, look at this. For example, the price is 2 here. So 2, I take 2 here. So the quantity, for example, demanded is 25. So it's, let's say, somewhere here, or this is, for example, the point where the quantity is, for example, the quantity supplied is, for example, 5, right? This is the quantity per period, the quantity supplied, clear? Then, for example, there is an increase in the supply, so you can see there is an increase in the supply. So this is the actually called the equilibrium point, clear? This is called what? The equilibrium point. This is the 15th. Let me write it down to make it more easy. This is, for example, the quantity supplied here is 5. So this is 5. Here, for example, the quantity supplied here is 10. So this is 0.10. This is the equilibrium point, as we can see in the table. So this is called 15. So you can just write it here. And then for example 20, so this is the point somewhere like 20, so you can just write it here, right? And then 25, so this is the point, we can write it here, 25. This is the quantity supplied, not the demand. You have to keep in mind that this y-axis also represents quantity of demand, but here it represents the quantity supplied, right, which is in kg, 5, 10, 15, 20. So here when the price is 2, so it's 5, 2, and so this graph is actually the representation of both of these, like the price per unit and quantity supplied in kgs. Clear? So I hope it's clear now. So this is called the equilibrium point, where demand and supply intersect with each other. So this is actually called the equilibrium point, where there is no increase in price and no decrease in the no increase in the price and no increase in the quantity demanded, right, or the quantity supplied, you can call it. So we call it what? The market equilibrium position. The next one, we will try to understand the concepts of the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, demand exceed or shortage, and supply exceed or you can. So let's start. Here, look at here, for example, the consumer surplus is the difference between the highest price a consumer is willing to pay. Just remember this, here the consumer is willing to pay more, right? And the actual price of the good or services. So this is actually the difference, where the consumer is actually willing to pay more, right? But for example, he's paying less. He's not paying that actual amount of money. Why? Because there is a decrease in the price, right? Due to certain conditions, due to certain, for example, situations, right? So this is called the consumer surplus. Sometimes it can happen that you are willing to pay more, but due to certain condition, you are not paying that money. So this is called the consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is the difference between the highest price of a consumer, right, and the amount that you are actually paying, for example. Clear? So this is called what? We call it the consumer surplus, right? And we know that this is called the market equilibrium point, right? So that is actually the difference, right, between the highest price a consumer is willing to pay and the actual market price of the good or service. Another one, we have the producer surplus. So producer surplus is the difference between the market price and the lowest price of a producer would be willing to accept, right? So the producer, for example, is willing to accept the lowest price. But for example, there is an opportunity in the market, so he's not getting that lowest price. He's actually receiving a very good price that he wasn't expected that. So that's called the producer surplus. And this is the graphical representation. Price is given on the x-axis, quantity is given on the y-axis, right? And this is actually called the producer surplus. He was actually paying the willing to pay the lowest price, right? But he's not paying, he's getting the highest price, right? So this sometime it can happen that you are expecting to sell, let's say you have a product, right, your cell phone, you are expecting, let's say $10, but unexpectedly you are getting the $15 due to certain conditions in the market, right? So that's called the producer surplus, and we know that this is the equilibrium point, right? So producer surplus is the difference between the market price, the what is actually, and the lowest price of producer would be willing to accept, right? So this area, it actually represents the producer surplus. The next one, we have the shortage. What does it mean? So shortage means excess demand, or you can also call it shortage is the condition that exists when quantity demand exceeds quantity supply at the current price, right? So sometime what's happening in the market, that the quantity supplied actually it's not available, right? The supply is not available and there is an increase in the demand of that commodity, right? So we say that the quantity demand exceeds quantity supply and the current price. And as for example, we do not have that much of the products or the commodity that is available in the market, right? So we can say that there is a shortage of that commodity that exists in the market. So when quantity demanded exceeds, right, then the quantity supplied price tends to rise. So the price will jump. Why? Because you do not have that commodity, because you do not have that product available in the market. So it will jump or it will rise until this short period, right, until equilibrium point is restored, right, until the equilibrium point is restored. Of course this there will be a rise in the price, right? Now we will see this concept through a graph. Look at this graph. On this graph, price is on the x-axis and we have the quantity demanded or quantity supplied on the y-axis. Quantity supplied is given here and also the quantity demand, right? Both of them are available. We can see the two. This is the supply curve, this is the demand curve. Demand curve is sloping downward, supply curve is sloping upward, right? Now we have this point is actually called the shortage point, right? This is the shortage. Now what does it mean, right? Look at here, for example, this is called P naught. Let's call it P naught, right? So this will be quantity naught, right? Or the initial quantity at that price. So this is the equilibrium point. Why it's called equilibrium point? Because this is the point where both the price and the quantity supplied meets or intersect with each other, right? This is an equilibrium position where the price is not rising or not decreasing, right? So now look at here, for example, look at the supply curve, for example. This is P1, let's call it P1, right? If it's P1, right, we can see that this P1 is intersecting here at this point, right? Let's call it Q1, right? If we call it Q1, clear, then it means that the supply actually reduced. If there is a reduce in the price, right? So the supply, what happened to the supply? So the supply reduced. So at the same price, for example, the quantity, let's call it Q2, for example, right? So the demand of the people exceeds at the same point. This is actually like we can see an expansion in the demand, right? So from this point to this point, right, there is what? There is a shortage that occur, right? Because people are demanding, right? And because the price is reduced, there is no supply available, right? So the price will jump until the equilibrium point is restored again, until both of them reach to the equilibrium point, right? So there will be an increase to reach this point. Same goes for the demand as well. So this is called the shortage. The next one, we have the surplus. So what does it mean? So it means that the excess supply or surplus is the condition that exists when quantity supplied exceeds than the quantity demanded at the current price. So what does it mean? It's really simple. When you have more products or more commodity that is available in the market, for example, so automatically, for example, it means that the quantity demanded is low, right? And because there are more products available, so it means that the quantity supplied exceeds than the quantity demanded at the current price. So when quantity supplied exceeds than the quantity demanded, price tends to fall, right? There will be a shift in the price, and that is actually they are falling until the equilibrium point is restored, right? They will fall until that point, the equilibrium point, that the price will be good enough for the producers, for the suppliers, right? Until the equilibrium point is restored. Let's see this concept through a graph. Again, we have the price on the x-axis and the quantity on the y-axis. This point here, this is called the surplus. How it's called a surplus? Let's explain this phenomena. This, let's say this is the initial price. Let's call it, for example, P naught, and this is the quantity supplied. Here we can call it quantity naught, right? Now, for example, or quantity supply point as well. This is the equilibrium point where both are intersecting, both the supply and the demand, right? So this is actually the supply curve, as you can see, and this is the demand curve, as you can see here in the graph, right? So from P naught, let's say there is an increase in the prices from P1. So when you see an increase in the prices, what will happen now, right? So the suppliers will increase its quantity supplied to the market. Let's call it Q1, right? So there will be an increase in the supply. So it means that there are more products available in the stock in the market, right? So what will happen next, right? Because their prices are increased, right? So as we see, people are not interested to buy more, so its quantity demand will be reduced, right? So as in Q2, this intersecting point, it represents the demand, and we can see in a decrease in demand, right? So it means there is a huge gap between the supply that is available in the stock and the quantity demanded, right? So that's why it means that we have some amount in the market, and that's called, this point is actually called the surplus, right? These are the references that I used while making my. Thank you.